So it's mid-October and we're hopper droppering on the bow. Why hopper dropper? Well, this time of year the water's nice and low. You can use that hopper dropper to get real tight to those pockets on the edge. Let's face it, we're shallow water nymphing with a hopper dropper. It's just a shorter rig that we're using. But this time of year, those fish are still in that shallow on the edges. Great way to get them is with that hopper dropper. You can get close to the bank. You're not 9 feet down. You're you're only using a 2.5, 3 foot leader below that hopper. And you can get closer to the bank where those fish are kind of hugging. Still on the bank, the water's nice and clear. You're using a nice small dropper so you don't spook them. There's lots of boatmen around as well that'll that you can imitate with that dropper and fish nice and tight to those edges.
Terry, why would we use a hopper as opposed to just a light small indicator?
I had that question asked me yesterday. He said, why not just use a little indicator and a hopper or a fly down below it? And not even a minute later, this brown came up and tried to eat his hopper. So even this time of year, middle of October, you'll get the odd eat. So it's worth it just to even seeing that fish come up. So there's a seam up there, right off that edge up there. There's a nice deep bucket, and it's right beside the fast water. They just love holding in that soft water. Fast water is bringing them the food. All they have to do is pop out and get it. And we always catch fish there, so that's why I stopped and went up there. And
you can't not fish it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
it's hard to pass that spot up. So David, as far as rods go, what do you recommend for rod for hopper dropper fishing?
Well, I'm not lucky like you, Terry, that I get to be out here every day, but we get questions every day in the shop about how to fish hopper droppers during the season and stuff. And typically we use 4, 5, or 6 weight depending on your casting and what else you want to do with that rod. So a 5 weight is probably the good all-rounder on the light side that does really well with standard hopper dropper fishing. You have to be a little careful with the action, because if you start fishing lighter tippet on it and you have a very aggressive stiff rod, sometimes you can end up just snapping off the tippet between the hopper and the dropper because there's no give in that section. So we generally would suggest a little bit softer rod for that type of fishing, which also then translates into regular dry fly fishing.
So David, what do you like for a line and leader setup for hopper dropper?
Definitely a weight forward line is a big plus. If it's a little more aggressive on the front taper, it helps a little bit to turn over the hopper and the bead head behind it for sure. But a standard weight forward taper is good. And then the leader length, that's definitely a personal preference. I would say average person would use a 7.5 foot leader to the hopper, and then another 2 to 3 feet, like you said, up to the dropper, so that your whole outfit is somewhere between 9 and 10 feet long. Myself, I do use a 9 foot 2X leader to the hopper, and then have a couple of feet to the dropper. So my outfit would be a little bit longer. But that's a personal preference in your casting and where you're fishing and your ability to mend and all that kind of stuff. So that ultimately comes down to a personal preference for leader length for sure. So Terry, now that we're hopper droppering, we've been hopper droppering all season long, basically since July, and we're using different flies at different times of the year. So maybe just show us why we use that.
Well, if it's hopper season, typically you use a smaller fly, something to imitate an actual hopper. This time of year, we're not trying to imitate a hopper. We're trying to use it as an indicator almost to fish close to the edges. So that's when we'll use a fly that has a big antron wing or something that'll float, easy to see. When they're looking for hoppers in the summertime though, you got to get a little more specific, especially if they're keying in on those hoppers. That's when you'll go down in a size, or more realistic flies compared to the more impressionistic flies. They seem to, when they key in to those hoppers, the more realistic you can get, the better it seems to work.
Was that a hopper eat or what was that? No, the dropper. Oh, okay.
Okay, so with the different sizes of flies, Terry, you change the tippet up?
Yeah, that's where I really will change. If I'm using a real small dropper, I'll go to 3, 4x even, just so it cuts through the water a little quicker. If I'm using a big leech though, I'm using 0x, I'm going heavy. To the hopper, it's probably 0x, maybe 1x to the dropper, but real heavy line. But those big flies, they're not shy with them, so why use 4x to use as your tippet when you can use 0 and have the same results?
So with the different flies, Terry, and the different sort of sizes and styles, how does the difference in the actual setup work for the distance that you're fishing between the hopper and the dropper?
I don't change my distance that much at all. It's usually 3 feet, 2.5 to 3 feet from the hopper to the dropper. But you can even do a hopper-copper dropper. So in between that, put another fly, so you can fish 2 droppers below a hopper. But it's typically, 2.5, 3 feet between the hopper and the bottom fly.
So the hopper changes through the season. How does the dropper change through the season?
Early July, when the stoneflies are coming off, we'll even drop, instead of a little dropper beadhead, we'll throw a stonefly on, or even a small leech, and hopper dropper that. Again, a great way down those seams and stuff, a little leech dragging behind. Even a little drag is good for those leeches when you're throwing them down those seams. But then later in the season, when the water gets clear, they kind of go off the leeches and you're going to smaller droppers, bead heads. I like that little jig head type fly where it rides up when it's floating along. And in the fall like this, a boatman pattern's great little pattern, a Prince Nymph or little boatman pattern that works really good this time of year. So you can change it up. You can throw a leech this time of year, but there's not a lot of leeches running around, so you're trying to imitate what's going on. The leeches are more active in the spring for sure. If it's real soft water that we're fishing, we want a soft presentation, then I won't use a tungsten. I'll even, one that doesn't have a bead, real soft hackle type fly that you can, but you're not going to get it very deep very fast if you're not using a bead for sure. Well, if you're fishing a little faster water, those tungstens just get down so much faster. Even in the slower stuff, you know, gives it a lot of action because it drops so fast. I'm a believer in the tungsten for sure. Most of those tungsten jigs and even the leeches will have a tungsten bead on just because it gets them down so much quicker. And using the tungsten bead, you know, I use it probably 95% of the time, just because I know it gets down quick, especially if you're fishing those fast, rapid edges. You know, you're just more confident with that tungsten being down in the zone where the fish is compared to a fly that's not as heavy, that takes a little while to get down.
Well, when you're fishing a hopper dropper from the boat, when you hit water that's like this, that's fast, which is where we hook that nice fish, the casts are not long. We're talking like 20 feet, and it's just important to keep the fly in the right spot. Not keep casting, just keep it in the right spot, and then mend to keep it in there. Versus a slow, flat, long area, you can get a long drift, and your fly might be in the water for like a couple of minutes before you actually even cast again. So a spot like this, as compared to a flat, your casting is going to be radically different. When you're fishing from the boat, especially if you're in the front of the boat, for hopper dropper, that's the premium spot, there's no question about that. And if you can get it to be 45 degrees in front of the boat and do these casts at 45 and then do an upstream reach mend to get the fly line above your hopper, that gives you basically a mend in the air, which is why it's called the reach mend cast, and that gives you several extra seconds of drift, and a lot of times that's all it takes, because that fly is dropping into the right zone and the fish are on it right away. So it's only a matter of seconds.